The AI bubble. Everybody's talking about it and everybody's asking, is it going to burst? If so, when? What's the impact of it? How bad is it going to hurt? And honestly, I'm not sure if it's even the right question to be asking, because if you're paying attention and watching right now, I'm not fully convinced what we're looking at is a bubble so much as a snake eating its own tail. As you look around, there's endless funding, there's overnight startups, there's trillion-dollar valuations blowing up all underneath it. And underneath, there's nothing but a bunch of instability, which maybe that's exactly what we're talking about with the AI bubble. But I think there's a lot more to it, because in reality, money's changing hands faster than real value is being created. And in the middle of it is a whole world of people who are extremely confused and are looking for meaning in all of it. I'm Christopher Lind, and this is Future Focused. And today, as we navigate the intersection of business, tech, and human experience, I want to go beneath the noise of the AI bubble and help give you what I think are the most important components that you should be aware of, and also some insights and actions that you can take in response to it based on what's really happening inside this AI boom, so that you understand why in some ways it's more fragile than it looks, and in some ways it's far more durable than it looks. And in having that, hopefully you can keep your head clear while everybody else is busy chasing the hype. Now, before we get started, if this is the kind of conversation that helps you make sense of this wild world we're living in and you enjoy my content, I would greatly appreciate it if you liked, shared, subscribed if you're not already, and tell somebody else. Send it to somebody else who may benefit from this conversation. And if you really value it, if you really say, Christopher, thank you so much for what you're doing, I would love to take you out to lunch. Well, you might not be able to do that with me in the physical world, but you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Christopher Lind, and you can buy me lunch or buy me a coffee or buy me a bag of my favorite treat, almond M&Ms. I actually had a listener send me a big bag of almond M&Ms last week, which was absolutely awesome. So anyway, okay, so let's get into this. The way I'm going to break down this episode is a little bit different. I feel like each week is slightly different. So let me set some context. First, I want to lay out a couple of what I think are the most important things everybody needs to understand about this AI hype, this bubble, whatever you want to call it, that's happening right now, that is distracting a lot of people. And it's getting people to look, a lot of people to look left when they should be looking right or down the center type of a thing. So I want to frame those and just help set some context for folks so they know what we're dealing with. And then I want to get into what I think are probably three of the most impactful things that you personally should know and that you can actually take action on. Okay, so let's get into it here, because the three things that I think a lot of people are missing, and I was actually just on a call with somebody earlier today, and we were talking about the fact that I will say I think acumen overall of how the economics of some of this stuff works is raising, but there's still some gaps. And what many people who may not be as intimately familiar with what's happening in the AI industry, the thing is, it's not really that unique to AI, but in some ways it's playing out differently. And because the terminology sounds so different, people aren't always catching on to it. A lot of the growth that we're seeing is actually a complete illusion. And that's what many people miss as they look at this, what looks like this huge economic boom. I was reading some articles today talking about how, everybody's waiting this past week, and kind of this week, they're still figuring out what's going on after all these earning calls from the big 5 or 7, depending on which one you're looking at, the tech companies who really own like 40% of the market S&P. And so everybody's looking at them going, are they going to be profitable? Are they making money? All this other stuff. And many people are making decisions on that, but that's extremely risky, because what a lot of people aren't seeing is some of the smoke and mirrors that's happening. And what I mean by that is, you see some of these big tech infrastructure companies like the Googles, the Metas, the Amazons, the Microsofts, the NVIDIAs, the AMDs of the world that really are in the cloud services, chip, AI chip businesses. they're growing, but what a lot of people don't see is a lot of that growth, and I use air quotes around that, is from them investing in this just slew of AI startups that are popping up all over the place. So they're investing money, but then what happens is those companies, some make it, many don't. If they make it, those companies get the revenue from those investments, but they're winning either way, because what happens is, because they're investing in AI startups, those AI startups are dependent on their tech infrastructure. And so a lot of the money these big companies are spending on these smaller players is then being spent on AI infrastructure, which is going right back into the pockets of people spending it. And so it looks like, wow, everybody's watching the big seven or the big five, like, oh boy, is cloud growth going to, just continue going up and up and up? And it's like, well, it is right now, but that's not necessarily an indication of actual growth, because there's all these startups that most of which aren't going to make it, that even in this stage where they're not making any money, they're just living off of investor investments, is all going right back to the investors that are funding them. And so it creates this false sense of growth that isn't really there, which just adds to the hype around it. We're really mistaking a lot of this money changing hands as progress being made, and it's not that. And so we have to step back from that and go, well, okay, how do we actually examine that? Now, the other thing, or at least how do we not get sucked into this, that where I see this first one play in a ton, is this is what creates this FOMO, this fear of missing out, that, oh my gosh, look at all these companies that are growing. All these little startups are getting all these investment dollars, and that means they're exploding. And you're like, well, actually, sort of, but not really, which ties to the second insight, which is this whole, what you need to know about what's happening in the AI space is there's a big ROI gap. And that comes with some real risks. When what I'm talking about related to this first piece is, so a lot of those smaller companies aren't going to make it, but they're inflating the market in that everybody's seeing all these little companies that are getting millions of dollars investments from these big companies that really are just making safe bets, because they're going to make back a big portion of whatever they invest in these startups in recouped costs through AI infrastructure, that, they're not really losing there. And hey, if the companies make it, they just make more money. If they bust, it doesn't really affect them. And what we're seeing is that a lot of these small startup companies, the ROI is just not there. They're literally living off of investment dollars and hemorrhaging cash left and right. And that's a problem. That's extremely problematic, because if you're operating off of, oh my gosh, I've got to get in on this growth, and it's not really growth, you're going to make really stupid decisions. And I see this happening in 4 key areas. I see this in operational risk, where people are automating things that they shouldn't, because they're like, we got to move faster, we got to keep up, we got to do all this stuff. And it's like, keep up with what? There's nothing to keep up with. The reputational risk, companies are buying into some of this hype, and they're jumping on the AI bandwagon with tools that are not really capable. They haven't been tested. They're extremely vulnerable from a security standpoint, and it's damaging reputation when the companies use them and blow them up. And then when it implodes, it all falls back. You see the regulatory risk right now, as there's not a whole lot of regulation around things. We're not really sure who's held accountable for what, when things blow up, who actually ends up carrying the blame of the mistakes made. And so then all of a sudden something cracks, and it seems like it's fine, but then it cracks, and all of a sudden you see audits and fines and revoked licenses, all this stuff. But another big one is the dependency risk. As all these AI startups and all these tech companies and these big infrastructure companies get embedded into everything, it becomes harder and harder for companies to actually, when they start realizing there's no return on investment, actually back out of it, because now your whole infrastructure is tied to these very things that aren't delivering the things that you need. And so it's just a really important thing to keep in mind when you're reading all these headlines, when you're making decisions about what you need to do with AI. I wrote a post this week last week about how I've turned down, I don't know how many chief AI officer roles, because it's all built on this FOMO and this hype of where things are going. And it's like, folks, if you're expecting someone to come in and deliver on a promise that literally even the companies saying they're achieving this promise are not, you are set up for failure. And so you just need to take a deep breath and realize this isn't about missing out on ROI. It's about making sure you're not breaking things that you actually can't afford to break. Now, the third one is, again, just this misleading nature of, because there's this boom in infrastructure, there's this idea that automatically translates into economic boom. If Google, Apple, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, AMD and NVIDIA are all exploding, then that means so is the rest of the economy. Well, that's not true. And we're seeing that. And we saw that and I know it was contested, the Stanford research that a lot of AI pilots fail. I don't love that research, but there are things that you can take from it. I work with countless clients who are going, hey, we're not seeing the kind of economic growth that some of these other folks are. And it's that's because it's not realistic. And even what they're projecting or even what they're presenting isn't real. A lot of it is overinflated. It's unrealistic. It's, in many cases, like I said before, the money is just changing hands. There's not actually new things being produced. And so right now, there are a lot of people, going back to, if you don't know the California gold rush, the first millionaire in the gold rush was a millionaire for selling pickaxes. It's not because he struck gold. And that's a lot of what we're seeing right now in the AI industries. You're seeing a ton of infrastructure companies who are getting really rich right now, selling people shovels and pickaxes, knowing full well that most of the people they're selling shovels and pickaxes to are going to go bankrupt and end up having to go back and go back to their day job. And so you have to be really, really careful right now and not get bought into the idea that, hey, just because their bubble seems to keep expanding, we should be able to capitalize on that. Because whether or not their bubble bursts is kind of irrelevant. At some point, we're going to have to figure out what happens when it bursts, or in spite of it not bursting, because the rest of the world is not operating off the same set of rules that these technology infrastructure companies are. Okay, so hopefully that helps at least ground you a little bit more in what's going on and why some of the headlines you're seeing, everybody's waiting and has been waiting for this past week and the upcoming week to see where all these big companies going. And they're making a ton of predictions and investments based on that. And it's an incomplete picture. Okay, so hopefully that at least you can exhale, take a deep breath and go, okay, so I don't need to get completely sucked into. So Christopher, then what should I be thinking about? What should I be doing with this? Because that's really, I work with a ton of people who are not in these big 5 or 7. And that's the vast majority of companies out there. And that's the thing. Everybody's operating like this is the norm, and it's not. And so for the rest of us, what are we supposed to do? Well, the first thing I would say is, and I talk about this a lot, it is so important to recognize that AI does not create anything from thin air. It's simply transferring and converting things. And I talked in a post this week about how I talk with my kids. I make the analogy to the law of conservation of energy, which is energy cannot be created, it can only be transferred. And the same is true with economics. Okay, the way you run your business. AI is not manufacturing something that did not exist. And even where it might seem like it, because it does, I will admit, there are plenty of projects that I'll come into, or I'll come clean up the mess. And the reason they're in the mess is there was a period of time where AI seemed to be magically creating productivity or magically creating efficiency or new revenue growth. Because it was just moving so fast and doing all these things. But what people often don't realize is whatever it's doing is coming from somewhere else. And so where you might see AI moving really fast to increase customer service productivity. Okay, you take more calls as an example. You take more customer calls. And so you go, wow, we're taking more customer service calls than we've ever taken before. But what you don't realize is that because AI is doing so much of it, the quality of the calls is going down. Customer satisfaction is going down. Cancellation rates are going down. General public perception of the company is it's coming from somewhere. Human oversight is being missed. And so things are going left untouched because things are moving so fast. And to be clear, I'm not saying there's not room to run things more efficiently. I work with countless companies where we bring AI in to go, hey, like, here's an area that is actually inefficient that we can transfer some of the productivity from this inefficient stuff into a more efficient method of doing it. And then we can take the surplus that came off of that transfer and apply it to something else. Instead of, you could just apply it to do more, but a lot of times that's not actually the right move. You just end up with more production, but no more customers to sell your product to. And it's like, well, now you just have a greater surplus sitting in a warehouse, which is actually a liability type of a thing. And so I get how powerful the illusion of creation is and how alluring it is to people. That's why, there's so many people who just are wanting to sprinkle this AI dust on things, hoping that it's going to magically create something, and it doesn't. And the biggest risk is you as a leader, if you don't know what you're trading and what you're giving up or what you're compromising, you can't know if what you're getting in return is actually a gain, a net neutral, or a net loss. And what I'm seeing right now is because people are in such a rush and are getting so sucked into the hype over this AI bubble or whatever you want to call it, snake eating its tail, they're actually making choices and they're trading things that aren't worth what they're getting in return. Or it's the same thing. And you're like, well, now you're just shifting things from this to that. But honestly, most of what I'm seeing right now is people are actually getting a worse deal. And the problem is the short term, it doesn't look like a worse deal, as many things do. It's great now until something down the road breaks and you go, oh, okay, well, now that if I'd known that, I wouldn't have made this decision. And at that point, it's too late. And so the thing that every leader I continue to encourage them on is we need to take the time, and this is a lot of the work that I'm doing, is we need to take the time to do the transfer math. And we need to actually ask, all right, what am I consuming? What am I displacing by doing this? And am I creating dependencies or injecting risk into the system that I didn't have before? And I get right now, there is so much pressure to go, can't we just worry about that later? And I'm telling you from the work that I do, you can at your own peril. Because if you can't answer these proactive questions of what am I trading? What do I think I'm going to get? How am I going to measure it? How am I going to have a backup plan if I find out that the return isn't there and I actually gave up more? Like if you're not doing that, you're not leading your AI strategy, let alone your business strategy. You're actually just chasing the wind. And there's a lot of chasing the wind that's happening right now. And I would just encourage you, if you don't believe, I hope at this point you believe me. It's just a matter of, are you going to do something about it? I think about how many people tend to say, yeah, I really need to work out. I really need to eat better. And then how many of those people actually do something with that and actually see it through? And so I would encourage you not just to listen and go, that's a great point, Christopher. I agree. We need to do that work. Actually follow through with it. Actually make sure you're embedding that and taking the time and allocating the resources to make sure it happens. And if you need help with it, reach out to me. This is what I'm doing right now, is helping companies work through this really hard, messy stuff and doing it in a way that is at the speed of business. It doesn't have to be bureaucratic and time consuming and, over bloated. There are ways you can move quickly, but you cannot skip this step. Now, the other big one as it relates to the AI bubble is I talked earlier about how there's all these AI platforms popping up everywhere. And honestly, I just finished an interview where I was being interviewed for an article. And the questions they kept asking was, what platforms should we have? Which platforms do you have? Which platforms do you think every company should have? And my response back to it was like, This is the wrong question to be asking. Yes, at some point you have to decide if you're going to go with OpenAI or Anthropic or Gemini, or if you're going to use this tool or that tool. Yes, I understand you have to pick a tool, but the tools are temporary. I'm telling you right now, the landscape of all these AI tools is going to radically change. It's going to radically change on the other side of whatever this AI thing that we're in right now is. It always is the case. It always has been. It was the case in the internet boom. It was the case in the mobile boom. It was the case. Like this is going to change. And right now, everybody's so focused on which tool. What you need to focus on is which capabilities are going to be the currency of the future. And that's where, even in this interview, when it was like, well, which tool do you get? I said, well, no, what we need to talk about is what is the capability that an organization needs? What is it that they actually, what are the patterns? What are the processes? What are the capabilities and activities that they need AI to be able to do for them? And yes, then you can pick tools that meet those needs. However, if the tool set blows up or the tool no longer exists or vaporizes, you're not struggling to go, oh no, now I got to go find, now I'm going to Google or Perplexity or whatever and saying, what is the alternative to this and that? And you don't even really know what you were using it for. I'm telling you right now, the organizations that survive this aren't going to be the ones who pick the right platforms. And that's what everybody's doing right now. They're trying to bet on, is OpenAI going to be the big dog, or is it going to be Anthropic? And I the number of charts I see of like, oh, Anthropic's taking over OpenAI in terms of their enterprise sales. Big deal. You have to look at the capabilities underneath it right now, because the winners are not going to be the ones that pick the right platforms. They're going to be the ones who know what they're actually trying to be great at and what they need to be able to be great at that. And so as a result, you need to take inventory of your business capabilities and how that translates to your AI capabilities, not just the licenses and the tech suite that you have. So as an example, if you're a leader listening to this, go, okay, you know what? That's a really fair point. Here I'm out here doing RFPs on the top XYZ platforms that are all competitors in this space. I don't really even know what we would be doing with those tools. I would ask your teams, I would go to your teams, go to your colleagues, go whatever it is, and ask them, what are the strongest capability? Like, what are the things that we honestly cannot function without? And what are the things that maybe are very repetitive and robotic that we need to do, but maybe could gain some efficiency through automation? Maybe you're always doing the same thing. And don't ask them, which tools are you using for that? That is the biggest miss that I see all the time, is people automatically jump to, hey, what tools are in your portfolio? What ones are you using every day? I don't care what tools you're using every day. I want to know, what things is AI helping you with every day, and which ones are actually netting you a better result and which ones aren't. And to be honest right now, a lot of people don't have answers to that question because they haven't thought it through, which is why you as a leader need to be the one to ask those questions. And when you say, hey, what are you using AI for right now? And somebody says, oh, I use ChatGPT. Go, that's not what I asked you. I asked you, what are the things you're going to it for, and how are you using it? So that you can start to map that, and you can start to say, oh, okay, now I understand what this is. So when you say you're using Firefly's AI, or you're using Descript, or you're using ChatGPT, I understand that means it is helping you accomplish this task, this capability, so that I can start to plan for, okay, these are the things that people are getting a lot of value out of AI. And so if a AI company comes to me and says, hey, we can do this, do I need to pay attention to it or do I not? Or when we're doing an RFP, do I know what questions to ask and what things to dig into? And again, I know I keep plugging this, but if you need help with this, reach out, let me know, because I'm telling you, that capability fluency, it's how you're going to remain durable and steady and be able to adapt to the inevitable dynamics that are going to come. There is disruption coming at some point. And knowing what that capability is going to be the difference between staying steady and staying afloat and sinking to the bottom of the ocean. Now, the final one has to do with fighting against the idea that uniformity is success, and that's where you really need to go. And what I mean by that, and really the way I would frame this, is diversity is actually your best form of durability, at least right now. And what I mean by that is, there is this tendency right now, especially in this stage, for a lot of these big companies, big infrastructure companies, to just tack on, AI capabilities. And that can sound really appealing. Okay. I recognize that can sound really appealing. It can even sound safe, because you might go, hey, wouldn't it be better if, instead of having 10 different tools helping us accomplish this capability, we just had, one big tool that just had all those functionalities built into it? Because consolidation feels efficiency. It feels efficient to go, well, we only have one tool. We only use this one tool and we just leverage the AI capabilities within it. But what it actually does is it creates dependency, which right now is a very dangerous thing. Being dependent on any one thing right now is extremely dangerous, because the moment, like I said, a lot of these tech companies right now that we're looking out here that we're going, oh, this is going to be the clear winner. Those things can flip on their head overnight. And the moment one of those vendor changes, or they change their pricing or their access or their policy, or they go into an area, if you've now invested everything you have in consolidating all of your capability into that one tool, you are wildly exposed. You are extremely vulnerable. And I see this in organizations all the time, because I get brought in, and one of the number one things I get brought in for is, how do we consolidate our tech stack? How do we go from all these different tools? And Christopher, is there a way we can fold it into one? And my response to that is always, you do not want one. I promise you, you do not want one. What you want me to do is analyze, going back to my previous point, the capabilities that you need, and then to be able to build a diverse ecosystem of technology that allows you to do those best in class, but also makes them interdependent. So if any one of those pieces falls out, you actually can pick things back up. Just as an example of this, there was one organization I was working with where they had locked in recently their entire workflow for an entire department, okay, big department, into a single vendor. The whole thing was locked into this. And all of a sudden, that vendor got acquired. And the way the vendor worked, the way the platform worked, suddenly got randomly, dramatically changed. The service levels they had just completely diminished. And they said, we're sunsetting the product. Now you have to fold into our other product. And that other product was a product that they did not want to use. They knew it did not meet their needs. Unfortunately, they found themselves in a very difficult position, because at this point, financially, they were so in with this one product that we ended up pulling it off, but it was exponentially more difficult to deconstruct this big tangled mess of stuff and do it in a cost-effective way. And this kind of stuff can happen overnight. An acquisition can happen, change in strategy, a new investor can come in and take over things. Companies can vaporize overnight. And I don't say that to create fear and say, so you just need to be afraid that everything you have might be gone tomorrow, but that is something that you need to operate with in the back of your mind. So you need to design for resilience. You actually need to build that into your digital ecosystem and your infrastructure so that you're keeping multiple lanes open. While there is room for consolidation, and I will admit that when I work with, especially with large organizations, especially ones that have acquired companies over the years, there's always room for consolidation. There's one organization I was with, they had 32 LMSs. Okay. You don't need 32 LMSs. I can promise you that. So there is room for consolidation, but it shouldn't be consolidation for consolidation's sake. It should be about, to the previous point, identifying what are the capabilities, how are those capabilities used, what are the most important things with those capabilities, what are the different data sources that we have, what are the different vendors we have in our ecosystems, and then what are the skills and the team members that we have in place. And then let's actually design a roadmap that brings us back to a right-sized digital ecosystem, not a consolidated digital ecosystem. And that may sound like nuance, and it is, but I'm telling you right now, efficiency might win in the quarter. And that's one of the things I consistently see. You might just be able to say we're chasing efficiency and consolidation, and that may get you some decent wins for Q3, Q4, or whatever. But over time, I consistently see it ends up falling out. Resilience and diversity comes and lasts for decades, and it will actually help you weather this whole instability that we're seeing right now, regardless of what happens with Google, Apple, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, NVIDIA, and AMD, right? If you follow these steps, I'm not saying the AI bubble won't affect you, but I will say you will dramatically increase your resilience so that if it pops, if it doesn't pop, if it expands, if it goes left instead of right, you will be more positioned to be able to just kind of bob and weave a little bit without getting completely exploded in the fallout of this. Now, I think if there's one thing, so hopefully that helps give some clarity to what's going on and what you can do with it in a really practical way. And when I say, if there's one thing this season is teaching us, it's that anything can happen right now. And I think maybe that's when people say, is the AI bubble going to pop? I think in some cases, that's really what they're talking about. Is there the possibility this whole world could turn on its head overnight? Yes, absolutely. Tools rise and fall. Markets are going to shift overnight. Global economies are going to flip on their head. Global powers are going to flip on their head. Even the things you think are a sure thing are anything but that. The only constant you can build on is instability. And that's why I'm trying to lay this out in a way that will actually help you have a firm foundation on a very unstable ground. So, build your strategies, your systems, your leadership posture like a living organism, something that you can flex and heal and adapt. Because, certainty is an illusion. If you think you know for sure what it's going to be or how things are going to play out, you don't. I promise you that. And anybody who comes to you and promises they have that, they're either lying to you, they're delusional, or they're trying to sell you something. Maybe a combination of all three. And I don't want you to be somebody who falls victim to that, because the leaders who make it through this next wave, they're not going to be the ones who predicted everything perfectly. I'm telling you. The success you're going to see in the coming years is not going to be the ones who bet on all the right companies. And that's not to say there's not going to be people who are made extremely wealthy by betting on the right companies or making the right bets. But the ones who sustainably last are going to be the ones who stay grounded while everybody else is just running around panicked. So I really hope that this episode helped, especially given what just happened this past week with some of the earnings calls and just some of the things that you see, and the fact that it feels like depending on which news feed you're reading, you're going to get a wildly different answer to whatever questions you ask, because my goal is to make this a little more clear. And if it helped you, I really would encourage you to please share this with somebody else who may benefit from this kind of clarity. And if you hear this, if you recognize, you need to do this, but you need some help, that's okay. I think anybody right now who doesn't think they need help is probably exceptionally vulnerable. Even the most well-equipped, brilliant people I know are recognizing, like, hey, there's a lot more to this than I know what to do. And that's what leaders do. Leaders acknowledge when they need help, and they recognize when they need it, and they bring people in to do it. So whether it's strategy, transformation, figuring out how to balance people, performance, and tech, reach out. I can either have a conversation and help connect you with the right people, or maybe I can be that person to help you get there. And thanks for listening. Until next time, we will see you on the other side.